about some fascinating things today at this interdependence junction and rebirthing of the nation. I wish I could run the video, but I may not be able to. We might do it at the end of the show, but today, as I have been with the vulnerable monk who lost his leg during the Walk for Peace, I was with them through the weekend at a mindfulness meditation, and it couldn't have been a better time to do this show because I've been in deep reflection about where we are right now in the South and how South Carolina had a major role to play for the birthing of our country. So we're going to be talking a little bit about grid work from an indigenous perspective, and also slavery and the things that happened in the country from the Revolutionary War and where we are now, as there has been so much healing and clearing from the monks that did Walk for Peace through some of the most challenged areas in the South. So I want to kind of just start this off with an affirmation of peace and true healing. Beings be at peace, and may all beings be happy and be well. And every time I hear that now, I think of the beautiful smile on Venerable Bhikkhu Panakara's face, and now Madam, who I've been just super grateful to be in this mindfulness meditation. Came back to Center for Spiritual Living today because we had a service here that we committed to, that we were going to start at Asheville's oldest tree, hoping to take you there later on. But it is storming in Asheville. It sounds like the rain is coming, and we welcome it.
The 365-year-old tree. And what's interesting about this place, the founders of this church are named John and Barbara Waterhouse. John the Baptist and Barbara Ra, bringing the true sun codes into the water, which is important, into the living light to protect our waters as we do a deep override of these data centers that are going to be using our natural resources. We rebuke.
We rebuke that. Yeah, we are opting for a higher timeline, realizing that the indigenous spoke that you cannot eat money. So we realize that we have to be ambassadors of the planet for seventh generational purposes, and have for quite some time. Missy and I have known each other since 2012. We met at Star Knowledge Conference when Chief Golden Light Eagle came into Hendersonville and did an amazing grid ceremony there for healing the timelines and the grids from all the indigenous wounding from the Indian Removal Act. So we really did want to dive in, and I know this is going to be a free flow. I feel like we're doing like
just a conversation. Like what I want to bring in first is when I did that before I met you, when I met the two Donnas, connecting in with Mount Mitchell. It's like the mountain, the highest point east of the Rockies, east of the Mississippi on the Eastern Continental Divide, actually told me that it was holding all timeline memories because of the magnetics inside the mountain. I've talked about Mount Mitchell many times. It resides at 6,684 feet. It's totally clean now since the obelisk in Asheville, that was the Vance Monument, actually came down, even though from the perspective of the human being, sometimes removing things without telling his, her story can be detrimental. But I see on the higher timelines, it was actually scrambling the frequency because the things that were in the mountain, those magnetics, were actually talking to that obelisk. So that's clean. Even though the spring is not accessible, it's for the highest timeline right now, so people don't go to that spring in unawareness, or dogs pee on it or whatever, because it has to be healed, because below it is a water reservoir. I didn't even know the importance that Mount Mitchell would play, except that it showed me it was holding all divide, being on a continental divide, memories of timelines, which is the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, divide between masculine and feminine, between race, between class, the removal of the Cherokee, the slave mart that's down in Charleston, where they brought the slaves in. Even though when I went to when I went to that slave market when I was going to be doing a grid work in Charleston, but it told me when I was there, the collective was telling me it was actually for the highest and best, even though it didn't look like it, because that was their way that they were going to come to America because of the turnaround. Their own people sold them into slavery because a lot of them were criminals, and they were brought to the United States to grow cotton and to grow other crops, and then that was turned around again. So it made a triangle, and now those Geechee are actually the ancestors of the people in Charleston. So,
and I have such a profound respect for the Geechee Nation, and I'm grateful to say that there is a huge awakening going on in Charleston with our African American brothers and sisters, and I feel that really needs to be discussed, because I feel as someone who's grown up in the South, you know, born and raised here, and I've watched all these different variables from, like, you know, hate breed, racism, to slavery and indigenous wounding, and having Native American blood, Cherokee war woman in my bloodline, and seeing all these injustices and patriarchal that was just normal, especially growing up in the church, you know, that it was normal to beat the tar out of your child after church if they didn't behave. These things were just normal. You kept your skeletons in the closet. Even me at my age, I heard some of those things, and so it really made me feel into when I went to Charleston, because I have family down there, and you know what our connection to Charleston was, and we were talking about the pineapple fountain in Johns Island.
and I went there the first time in 2015, so we met in 2012. This was sitting with me, so I started doing research, and Ron wanted to do, you know, we wanted to do a vacation. So one time we had done Myrtle Beach, and another time a friend of mine said, why don't you guys go to James Island, bring your RV, you'll like it. And when we were staying in James Island, they actually were doing tours into Charleston, so we didn't have to do it. So we did the Fort Sumter tour, and then I got the whole download that I've been carrying since 2015 about Fort Sumter. And 2 years ago, I really thought a grid work project, which you could have been involved in, was going to be done. I had it all planned out. I had the whole boots on the ground tour, which was going to, you know, end at the Provost Dungeon and the Tavern of Rainbow Row, right where the first liquor store is in the whole country that's holding reverse rainbow codes as well as the spirit of Al Ghul. But in that Provost Dungeon, not only was it the Sons of Liberty, but in the upper part of it was, which I can't think of the name of what it's actually called right now, but that's where the Declaration of Independence was ratified.
And they were ratifying big time because all of our founding fathers were getting crunk.
They were drunk there,
yeah,
because they're stressed out. They had a lot of stress, and there was moonshine, and there was speakeasies. But so when that didn't happen with outsiders, I had seen it successful in another timeline. I saw an actual Jehovah's seal removal being done on the beach at that, you know, at the pineapple fountain, and went to the Blind Tiger and all these places. So I had this whole thing, you know, designed, this whole tour that didn't happen. And I said, well, I guess it didn't happen because it really needed to happen with the Geechee Golem, who were the slaves and the ancestors of the people that actually did it. And it didn't happen with them either.
Well, we were so
but it happened
close
with the
because-
monks.
Yeah, it happened with the monks, and that's what's so beautiful about this, and I want to tie it in. At the same time Missy was working on this, I was working on an ecstatic dance at Unity Church in Charleston, and we were thinking about weaving these together, and thought it was really interesting that both of us were, you know, mountains to sea people, so
Mountains
to
to
speak.
see, yeah.
And mine was, you know, when I became a grandmother of 4 beautiful grandchildren that lived down there. And so I had spent a lot of time in Folly and Pineapple Fountain and, you know, Johns Island, James Island. And, you know, Charleston's a really beautiful place. And in the nature of Charleston, at one time, it was a very wild beach. And I see photos of how the beach looked before when the indigenous people lived there. And I think there's a handful of tribes down there. It's really beautiful about how many indigenous tribes were in Charleston and in the lower lowlands and everything. And I feel, you know, my ancestry and where we came from was deeply steeped in the South. Even our indigenous people, deeply steeped in the South, Oconee County, North Georgia. So it's really interesting because, you know, Charleston and Clemson have this undisputable connection because a lot of people from Clemson University, their alma mater is, you know, definitely they're in Charleston or they'll go to College of Charleston, and there's a lot of intermingling, and it made me really think about, you know, the Trail of Tears and just how patriarchal, you know, Charleston is, and a lot of this generational clearing right now is happening because this generation is clearing the 7th generational timelines. And I'm going to speak on a couple of things that are kind of like, if you know about them, you'll be like, oh, I see how that's connected. But one of them is Charleston's first burn emergence is like when that generation came in and they were the ones that were moving because their parents never danced on the beach, or they never danced for, you know, freedom and felt, you know, connected to the ocean or connected to the rhythm or whatever. And I had so many friends involved with that, and I've been over the years, but it's been a big component of the younger generation coming online, even to the path of yoga and meditation outside the indoctrinated church. And that happened too after that shooting in Charleston, where 6 people were, you know, shot in the church by that.
And the time when I did that grid work in Charleston, I remember there was a huge shark attack right after. So there's always some kind of shooting or some kind of weirdness that happens. But I want to take us back to a time with this tree, this 365-year-old tree. And then there's a tree, the angel oak, they call it the mother tree, which is in James Island, or John's Island,
yeah.
which they don't know the exact year, but it's a live oak, and it's
beautiful.
It's 400 or 500 years old. It's the oldest live oak east of the Mississippi also, and how the trees talk with the mycelium network. And the show that I did last night, and actually the past few, the one on Typical Skeptic podcast, when we were looking at Pittsburgh, we saw there was a 420-year-old tree and a 422-year-old tree on the Potomac River, which the Potomac River connects into Washington, D.C. But staying focused on the Carolinas, what's important about the Carolinas, at one time when that tree was around, there was no state at all. You know, this tree is seen before the 250th, you know, this is the 250th birthday of our nation, but before this nation was a nation, it was a young tree, and it saw the birth of this nation, and it also saw the time when the Carolinas were just the Carolinas. There was no actual North and South Carolina. It was just the Carolinas, and South Carolina is where the first shots were fired, which means they want to secede from the Union. North Carolina didn't even want to get involved. That's where the Cherokee removal took place. They kind of wanted to keep to themselves, and you know what happened with Andrew Jackson. Now, also when the succession was over, and at the end of the Civil War in 1865, in Abbeville is actually where the reintegration took place of South Carolina back into the states. So.
And I have to say this, Abbeville, Oconee County is actually the land of my people, which is, you know, North Georgia, Abbeville, Oconee County. Oconee means land by the water, and Cherokee, so the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears, you know, was a big part of that whole entire area. And a lot of people will walk these lands and they will feel the indigenous spirit on the land there, because a lot of our people were so shocked. You know, they had a real connection with the land. Their ancestors were there and they communed with their ancestors, and then all of a sudden their people are put on the Trail of Tears. So there was a lot of displacement that happened, and I'm going to speak on this with the Buckle of the Bible Belt. I think it's time to bring that in. So I feel I can speak on this because as the settlers were coming in, of course they brought good old time religion with them, and there was no good old time religion at that point, but living in the hills taught them a lesson, as they brought a lot of the what's known as Appalachian bluegrass, and how the moonshine still started in the dark corner and all that. It's really interesting because they took a lot of the water and they utilized our sacred water for moonshine.
Home of Popcorn Sutton, actually, which is in
Oconee.
Yeah.
Well, no, he lived, no, Silas Butts and Popcorn Sutton were really good friends. I know this, my grandparents raised me. So he was the moonshiner in Oconee County, in between Popcorn Sutton and Silas Butts. They used to run moonshine, trade moonshine. And they had lots of orphan children. You know, Silas Butts had like 75 orphan children in Oconee County. And that was typical for moonshiners to adopt a lot of, children.
And in Madison County, so I have a friend, actually, it's the biological connection to Arthur,
Oh.
where he was actually conceived, even though he was born in Jacksonville. It's the Howard Moore. Howard Moore was not a family member, not blood relation of Popcorn Sutton, but was like a deep friend, so considered him family, and that house is like 200 years old. So actually, it's probable that Popcorn Sutton was actually in that house.
And it's so interesting, we did an event called Rebirth in Pickens, South Carolina, and my friend Rachel, she had Popcorn Sutton's moonshine oven. She said that was in his cabin. And it's so interesting to me because all the Southerners that I know, they still love to talk about their moonshine stories and Civil and Confederate, and a lot of the houses you'll go into, they still have the Confederate flags on the wall. But
Thunder Road was filmed in Asheville.
yeah, and this is true also in upstate South Carolina. So this generation is the one that's had the houses passed on generationally to generational, the family land and the agricultural land, and they've inherited the 2 or 3 story houses that were built hand hewn by their great, and they're taking the rebel flag off the wall. They're the generation that's doing it. And what I wanted to say is a lot of this is happening through transformational music. It's happening through events that are conscious events that, you have ceremony around them, you have lots of dance, you have a lot of sound healing, yoga, connecting to the earth, because the generation has never gotten to process their ancestry, and a lot of things will come up with to them when they go through these processes. So we're bringing the indigenous peoples back into these ceremonies to hold space during this timeline. And it's so important not to just get lost in the plant medicine mix, but to really stay in the heart and to go through the sweat lodge and to go through the ceremonies that are connecting back to the land. And, Missy and I were talking about the plants do have a place, but it has to really be done in a clear container.
In a sacred way, instead of just an escapism. And I do understand about the rebel flag and have respect for the rebel flag, because I also can't say I trust the federal government either, and we don't want to go on down a timeline where we're just trusting that side either. But it's about the reintegration of all these things, that it's all one, whether it's been split out, whether it's the dark and the light, it's the masculine and the feminine, all these things are one, whether the victim, victimizer, yes, there's roles that we've played, and one time in one lifetime, the person's the victim, the other one's the victimizer. Well, you know what, all these timelines can be cleared, and it's not necessary to play any role anymore. It's the time to step into your true soul, oversoul, monadic, avatar identity at this point.
And then you can't
And
just
live it.
blame it on karma. That's where we're at too.
Yes,
It's like a lot of people
karma's done.
That's your karma. That's your karma. No, we're not at a place where we can blame anything on karma anymore. We have to take a sacred accountability if we're conscious at all to be able to say.
And it's 441, which is 144.
So it's
See that?
441.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which is
So,
144.
I wanted to just go into like why it was so important for the monks to walk for peace. Their 2,300-mile journey all the way from Texas, when they hit places like Alabama and Georgia, and then they came to South Carolina, North Carolina, they were doing grid work. I have spent time with these monks, and, I'm very connected to the teachings of the Dharma and mindfulness, and I really feel...
And they anchored in Columbia, which is the midpoint between the high country and the low country, which is called the Midlands. So that's
and that was
significant
powerful
too.
to see 10,000 people there at the state capitol, and knowing if you were born and raised in these in the South, the mountains, or the low country, or the Midlands, or whatever, there's a certain dynamic of like pride that gets brought in from generation to generation. It's passed on, where your, especially grandfathers, seem to grandiose all the wars and everything, and the patriarchy comes into the dinner table right after Sunday church. I remember, because my grandparents raised me, and they were very Southern, and it was just normal, and you could tell the women were just like, they were still sending the Southern hospitality, like, y'all want some more sweet tea? Y'all want some more cornbread? They were trying to interrupt all these
And some
stories.
watermelon, which we're gonna have.
And they would try to interrupt these stories just so this whole perpetuation of like doom and gloom and death wouldn't be at the dinner table where they slaved and made the meal and the family come together, and they created it with so much love. So, I really feel, as I talk to people my age that were raised in the South, that they're seeing a lot of things being cleared in their generational ancestry that has to do with their family being slave owners, plantation owners, cotton mill, and even passing during the Industrial Revolution, the textile industry, there was still racism, there was still slavery going on in the families. That was normal. It's just like they still had slaves living in the house. And I remember as a child hearing the word master. And I did not know as a child what that meant. And I knew that there was something really weird about how people treated each other. And it was because it was so normal in the South. And now it's being, decentralized, being unnormalized from, the conditioning.
But not all slaves had it bad either, and some didn't even want to leave because they had become family.
That is true.
So that was, because how do you reintegrate into society when you may actually have it better, because just because you're now free doesn't mean you're really free, because freedom is something that we have to execute and take. We have to, and now it's 444, which is all about building that. It's about building that structure.
Building our new earth.
How do you take that freedom? So yes, we're free, but we're only free within the confines that we know how to actually execute freedom, is what I feel.
Well, it's so beautiful because before I got to the sacred tree and I was just gauging, are we going to be able to do a ceremony here and open up the container for the event that we do called Sacred Synergies on Sunday, I kind of was just with this beautiful being, and hopefully we'll be able to take the camera up there and show everyone if the rain clears up. But when I found out all the history of this tree, what really dawned on me was not only the indigenous, he wasn't an elder, he was a young man. He was a Cherokee young man who transitioned at the tree because when they had the Revolutionary War here, all these people set up camp, so all the soldiers set up camp, and the coyotes kept on going after their food, and they thought it would be a wonderful idea to poison the water. So their infantry basically poisoned the water, and this is the first environmental issue I had ever heard of in the U.S. I'll be honest, that's the first perpetration of environmental disharmony that I heard of, and it happened here in Asheville. So when I heard that, what happened was the young Native American man, and I can imagine him. I've actually seen him. I have a name for him because I see him near the tree, and he's a beloved, definitely, someone I feel that watches over the land here. He requested to come to this tree and to cross over, and he drank out of the water. That is why he had to cross over so early. And he actually cursed.
And people feel that curse when they come to Asheville. So it is interesting. I will say this, the Revolutionary War was prominent, but as far as Asheville goes, the Civil War, one of the last places was the Battle of Asheville, which can be found at the Botanical Gardens. You can actually see the sign, you can actually feel where the soldiers were when you go to the Botanical Gardens. I know people that move here, ourselves included, you will be tested when you come into this area whether or not you're worthy of staying here. That's absolutely sure.
Amen.
Not just by this man, but also by Tasali, who was hiding out near Devil's Courthouse. One time I was up on the Blue Ridge Parkway picking blueberries around August, and I don't remember what year this was, but it was when they were building those, what's under the ground, and I heard these thumping, and there's a story about Judaculla Rock, and you can find the petroglyphs of Judaculla in Cullowhee. That's a whole other story. But if you actually go up onto the Blue Ridge Parkway at Devil's Courthouse, there's a whole, there's a myth about Judaculla and his maidens, that he was a giant. And I talked about this on numerous radio shows. But anyway, us going to the base of Devil's Courthouse, we went one way, and I heard this weird frequency in the air. I said, it's not this way, it's the other way. We found $17 on the ground. We went to the water, we took a dip in the water, we put our crystal skulls in the water, and all of a sudden I went into a remote viewing because we heard the thumping, which was kind of opening the portal, and I saw the war paint, and I actually saw the whole drama of that Tasali was actually hiding out there with his men, and he had cursed the land too. And you
So-
can hear more about this story if you want to go into Cherokee and you watch the drama called Unto These Hills.
Yeah, and it's playing right now, so it's easy to find, and I encourage anyone who has never seen that to watch it because it's a really,
Don't go on a rainy day. You
Yeah,
don't get
definitely.
refunded.
go when they have a powwow as well, because, and you know, that's a lot of gratitude for me, because they're bringing back our Cherokee lineage here. Because when you went to Cherokee when you were a child, they used to just have somebody playing a little plastic drum,
Right.
beating on it, dressed, you know, and basically a loincloth as a child. And we had no history on our Cherokee people here. Now we're really uncovering the sacredness, our history, our growing, our planting seasons and everything like that, because the ancestry is coming together again, even though we don't have our records, like a lot of people that sit in ceremony, or they'll find documents and they'll start piecing these things together. But I want to speak on something real quick. 'Cause
One thing I want to say, I was going to do a rain dance before. I was doing it in my mind, but I didn't think it was going to happen this soon.
Yeah, it's
We need
raining
it,
in
we need
Asheville.
it.
We really need it, so I'm very grateful for the rain.
Me too.
So I wanted to speak on that tree again. So when I go up there, I feel this beautiful Native American presence. It feels like an elder at this point. It's just a wise being, you know, just observing. And I got cold chills when I say that. You know, before I even started doing ministry here, that tree called me up here. And then I found out it was also a hanging tree, and I wanted to speak on that really quick. And so hanging trees were common, and the last lynching in the state of South Carolina was in Pickens. And so that was really interesting. When I was down in Charleston, you know, knowing what I do about my family lineage and my connection for Charleston and Pickens and Oconee and North Georgia, I was there with my partner, and we were right in front of a healing center, and we had our cars parked right in front of this old church, and it was on, I think, Conyers Drive, or it was something named after Georgia. And Charleston has the old cobblestone streets. And
Yes,
I
they
remember
still
I
do.
told you about this because I said, Missy, I have to tell you this because you're probably the only one who would get it. But all of a sudden, I go across the street, and I have a quantum sound healing instrument in the Paradigm, and I put it in my car, and it was like I was looking, all of a sudden, I was in a different timeline, and I see horse and buggies coming down the cobble street, and all of a sudden, I'm at a horse and buggy, and I've got this, like,
Southern Belle.
yeah, I'm embodied in my ancestry. I see this hat, this wide brim hat that had like feathers down. I could see this, you know, feathery outfit with a bustle and everything. I'm looking down and I'm seeing this. And I'm looking at my husband, and he's wearing a top hat. He's a gentleman of the day. And I flash back, and I'm at a horse and buggy. This church is here. And I'm seeing these timelines where they had hangings at the tree there, and it was a white stone church, and I've come to find out that was the case, that they did have hangings there. And
That was their entertainment.
That was
They
their
look at-
entertainment.
They thought that was entertaining to go
And-
watch a public hanging.
So when I found out that this tree had that history too, I was like, yes, because that tree is holding so many healing prayers. And as much as there were curses, there were blessings on the land too. And I feel that over time, that
All the
there has,
prayer ties and things that have been made, and
there is a
prayer
lot.
flags that have
this-
been flown.
The
Yeah.
beings know that they're very loved, and you know, beings can leave because they know that they're loved, they're honored, they're appreciated, and their mission was not in vain. You know, because we learn from history, and we're here to tell her story now. And that tree is a beautiful, loving mother tree. It just, you know, sends out love and radiates this love. The same with angel oak. The same with the tree that I was just with when we were doing the mindfulness meditation.
The same
with
trees
Mark.
that I picked up, and even one in the UK that's 800 years old. There's actually a tree that's 800 years old I tapped into. But sometimes, even telling the story, and we have deep respect for these stories, but we don't want to relive the story where there's a charge that is in our body, because sometimes what happens, you get so enmeshed in that story, then you have to have a storm that comes through, like Hurricane Helene, which will actually do a deep clearing on all those old stories, all those old hauntings, and all those old things in the water, to replace it with now new stories that are pertinent,
Well, it's a
that
bad
still
thing.
hasn't recovered. It still hasn't recovered in the Swananoa River and in the parts of Asheville near the Biltmore Estate, which is the Biltmore Village.
Well, a lot of my teachers talked about a baptism, and when Asheville got to that point where it was gonna be, not just Asheville, Western North Carolina, how you were talking about, Asheville will test you. Mother Asheville,
Yes.
she will put you on restrictions, she
will.
will test you. I will even say more than that as a Southern woman, she will tear you up if she has to.
Yeah, she's got the
She will
word
put
she
you on
and
your
she's got the
knees.
word ashes, so it's like the
She will put
phoenix
you on your knees.
rising out of the ashes
And
with
so
her.
I honor her with all the love I have in my heart. She is a part of me, and I really do, see a lot of people moving here, and they think they can take these mountains, and they can tear down our trees, and they can build their fancy homes, and they wonder why we have erosion. They wonder why we have issues here, because we do not ask permission. And I want to bring in the Cherokee Little People, and some know them as...
Mary Joyce is the one who wrote about the Cherokee
And,
Little People.
Last night we had an elder at this event with Maadam, who was holding space as a sacred fire, and he was talking about the little people, and I've had experiences with little people. They're real, and a lot of times people do not ask for permission, and they will go to these sacred lands, and they will start like tearing down the trees and getting it ready to build houses. They had no permission to be on the land, so, with all due respect, if you plan on coming to Asheville and building a home, or this area, these mountains, you need to ask for permission, because the nature spirits are very present here, and they do have a say-so in matters.
Well, George Vanderbilt, even though, part of the Vanderbilt family, one good thing about the Vanderbilts, when they came, George actually saw how treeing out the area was going to cause erosion and cause a bunch of problems. So he brought a man named Robert Schenck from Germany that actually started the first forestry school in Pisgah, in Brevard area. So that's, so that's a philanthropist thing to do. But the problem is, none of these trees are very old. There's very few real old growth trees anymore.
Well, they're deep in the mountains, and I'm glad that they're deep in the mountains, and a lot of those trees hold so much habitat and so much history and so much, if you're an ethnobotanist, you can really get the download on our land and the diversity here. And we have some of the most prominent biodiversity in the world.
Like going up to the Pink Beds, for instance, which isn't far from that, where the first forestry school, which is called the Cradle Forestry.
And so, this is a place you don't want to go and you don't want to perpetrate in Mother Nature. And I always say, I leave it like this, Mother Nature, the mountains here have witnessed this whole timeline. They are the oldest mountain ranges in the world, and they are holding the Akash for the planet.
That's true.
And the other thing is, we can't pull a wild one on Mother Earth, because she reads the soles of our feet. And I love that, because she can figure us out before we figure it out. And she can actually bring us into places when our heart is open to really connect with the truth of what the land is, why we were called here, why we're feeling this pull, if we just humble ourselves. And so,
even removing rocks, you have to ask permission if those rocks want to go somewhere else. Like I do find rocks that want to go to South Carolina, because they will be holding the grid from North Carolina. Usually they want to bring another one with them. They want to have two. They want to have a partner to, and the ones that come from here up to there,
Yep,
or the
exactly.
shells, they want to have a partner when they come.
and I love this, because when I gave my story, 2 weeks ago when we did the Boards of Canada, and I love this because I became a grid worker the second after that happened, not even knowing what a grid worker was, not knowing anyone who was doing it, but the rocks were communicating, please take us from, Table Rock to Pisgah, please take us from Pisgah to Table Rock. It was just like these rocks were telling me, I want to go be here so I can soften the land, so I can heal the land, so I can sing to the land. And in the Bible, it even says the rocks will cry out. So I think it's really
So they
fascinating.
can resonate, and they can go back to the Carolinas being one when the giants walked the earth, where it was like you and your gigantic self, you and your oversoul avatar self that connects with Polarian beings and the Northern Lights, when that being could actually just take a walk down the mountain to the sea. And it didn't take days or hours.
We had these giant beings during Atlantis, and all these timelines where we had Amazonian people, and at one time our continents were joined together. And a lot of people,
Pangea.
in Pangea, and Pangaea.
And Pangaea, and it's
Yeah.
weird that we had to have a pandemic, because we have to be brought back to Pangea. We have to be brought back. We had to have a quarantine because we have been in a domed quarantine a frequency fence where we have to graduate and get beyond that frequency fence.
Exactly. So the frequency fence too, there was a lot of clearing, and I want to say this, imagine 10,000 people that all of a sudden they felt something they had never felt. Maybe they felt it in church when they were young or whatever, but they felt the true heart of love. And a lot of people I talked to in places like Columbia, people came up from Charleston, they came in from Myrtle Beach, they came in from Greenville, whatever. They ended up in Columbia because they felt that they were to be there at that timeline, just to be in these teachings of the Dharma. And what was so beautiful is, like, even people that were conditioned in churches their whole life said that they had never felt Christ consciousness so present, like Jesus, like Yeshua would be walking with these monks. And they didn't ask for a dime, like the good old time religion, passing the offering plate around. They were just speaking in loving kindness. And I think that was the Christ consciousness that came in. So we are no longer the buckle of the Bible Belt. Did you hear me, Missy? I have to say this. I doused it out. We are no longer the buckle of the Bible Belt. And it's so precious to allow people origin from here to have an awakening and bring their knowledge in, and not just try to the spiritual one-upmanship. It's a time for the South to be very outspoken in their truth right now, because a lot of those generations never got to speak.
What I get, it's the true scripture belt, not the Bible, which is the Babel belt, which is the babbling, which is Babel, which is Babylon, and the separation.
It's
so
the true Christ consciousness.
Yeah, it's the Christ consciousness, not separation of church and state, not separations of this teaching and that teaching. It's not either or consciousness. It's not even, I want to say, service to self or service others or any of those things. It's service to the whole, myself included. That's the way I like to look at all of it.
So what's so interesting is Barbara O'Neill came to Tryon, and the woman who booked it named Jax, so she wanted a more appropriate spiritual Christian breath worker, because there were going to be so many Christians there at the event. And I told her my husband had been studying breath work for a long time, and he was Hebrew, and he was studying based on the Ruach HaKodesh, the keys of the kingdom are through water and spirit. And we had already brought breath work from several enlightened
Ruach El
teachers.
Shaddai, yeah.
Yeah, so we brought breath work from several enlightened teachers, and we were starting to bring it into the church, and I told her that. And he did breath work there, and just last year, when we went to the Art of Living in Boone, which my husband and I met there, and I'm the sustainable consultant for the next door property that was built by Maharishi.
Mahesh Yogi, right? For the Beatles, too.
And
Some of
we
the
went to Sri Sri, and we told him, Guru Dev, my husband just did breath work at Barbara O'Neill. Christians are interested in breath work for the first time. I said, there's as many yogis as there were Christians at that event. And I gave him the pamphlet that he was doing breath work, and he ended up assigning his secretary to reach out to Jax to book the event that's happening at Art of Living. And so you never know what the power of suggestion will bring, but it's interesting to note that Christians started wanting to do breath work, and I'm talking Christians that are deeply ingrained in the Baptist church. They were like, Barbara O'Neill started speaking about, our vibrational being and our body being a temple. And so all of a sudden you have Christians that are curious enough, that are dipping their toe into wanting to do breath work, wanting to meditate, as the Bible says 26 times, meditation, that there is this awakening going on in Christ consciousness that is unprecedented. And I find myself as a minister being able to bring that more in, where as Christians are reaching out to me and saying, hey, I know your grandparents used to be a big part of the Southern Baptist Convention and Billy Graham Foundation.
Because we have the Billy Graham Foundation here.
And your mom and dad used to be, meditators. What is your understanding with this path? Can Christians meditate? Can Christians be more mind, body, spirit conscious? And so that curiosity is coming in finally after 250 years. I mean,
Tell the story of who Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was.
Well, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was the Beatles guru, and he was the one that started Transcendental Meditation, and so.
He never even set foot on that property, isn't that right? He just looked at it from a flight above,
So
yeah.
I was called up there, a brother gave me a necklace that Alma has the other piece of on her altar, and as I was becoming the grandmother of my, second grandchild, I was really calling out to step into this role, and all these doors started opening, and I became the sustainable consultant of that property. And you can't make this stuff up, but I'm the type of person too, I have to speak about this with women. There was actually a patriarchal thing that happened where women lost their voices, and I need to talk about this in the
Oh,
South.
that happened to me too. Lost my voice from one eclipse to the next. Not my physical voice, but my online presence voice, and it took a long time to get it back.
But Southern women have been shut down so much in the home. This is one thing that we have to be careful with, and I'm saying this to the yoga community, I'm saying this to the spiritual community, as these sisters especially, as their hearts start to open and awaken and they start to receive intuition and spiritual knowledge, don't come in with spiritual one-upmanship. Don't come in with the comparison notes. Let them speak, because that is probably the first time that they've gotten to speak in a very long time in their heart. Embrace that. That is a gift. And also, I need to say this. People coming here from the West Coast that go, oh gosh, Asheville's so cheap and it's so easy, and we can open up our dream retreat center and we can do all this on a dime, and and I've actually seen the segregation of like how people come in from other spiritual communities and they don't realize the beauty of the people here and their healing journey and their healing process. And that is one of your, if we were to call it karma, which we won't, but that is like one of the things on your ancestral clearing list of why you are called here to these mountains, why you feel called here.
Some people don't know why they're here. They just end up here. They just come here.
They need, because that's the extra layer of healing, and usually it has to do with the humbling back into the mountains and sitting with that mountain woman, sitting with that grandmother, listening to that deep Southern Appalachian accent, hearing their stories that they never got to tell from their generational, because that could be some of the most healing medicine that you receive. And because your heart is open, it creates a whole new transformation of energy in your life to be able to clear your bloodline from any judgment or any kind of racism or any kind of segregation that you didn't even know you had in your family bloodline. And so that's why, Asheville will spit people, and Mama Asheville will sometimes spit people out of her mouth. I've seen it happen where people come and build their kingdoms in their New Earth communities, and they got all the money in the bank, but all of a sudden they find they can't vibe with Asheville. And a lot of it has to do is because they're segregating from the people here that actually called the people that come from other places in, because it was a agreement to do that for a deeper layer of healing. As people think they've done all the ancestral work, they find out a lot of times they get really triggered by Southerners, and there's an extra layer to do so you don't have those triggers anymore. And that's why Asheville takes, allows and empowers people to come in from West Coast or New York or, Florida, and
Even Europe and other places.
Yeah, do their little dance here and say their little, thing and do their little ditty. And then once they're done, they're like, why can't I make it work? Because you did not open up your heart big enough, as big as you thought it was. There was an extra layer to go, because Asheville's called the city of light and frequency. Asheville, Atlantis, we call it Ashlantis. It's actually the city of light and frequency. And if you look at Atlantis, the Atlantic Ocean, Charleston.
Yep.
Charleston.
Part of Stargate 3 there, which is the Bermuda Triangle.
Yep. And so this is the layer. This is like the layering on the cake where you go deeper into the heart. And it is sometimes that most transformational layer if you just stay with it. If you see the beauty of what's in these mountains and these mountain people without judgment, just like Venerable Bhikkhu Panakara did. He brought the Dharma, we'll essentially say he brought the path of yoga into places where people were intimidated to bring it in the South. And that is why there's such an awakening happening here as well. That's why we're no longer the buckle of the Bible Belt. We're not the buckle of the Babel Belt anymore. We are really coming into the heart of Christ consciousness. Because when the Dharma walked here, it was in Buddha. It was not in Buji. It was not in proclamation. It wasn't, asking for anything. It was that loving kindness that was walking through, that true forgiveness. And that was what's so beautiful too, Missy. I feel like the forgiveness piece was the big cherry on the cake, because for him to be invited in the Baptist churches and the churches to speak about forgiveness, where you couldn't fit another person on the lawn if you tried to squeeze them in, it was absolutely what needed to happen. And so many curious people came in from the path of yoga that they could not believe that there were Southern people that were having blasting open, heart open, wide experiences that yoga could not put a price tag on. And I'll just be honest, because that's what's happened in the South too. Everybody wants to capitalize on dollars and cents and making more money and building more retreat centers and getting more followers and influencers, versus how we do it in the South. Come eat, sit a spell, be part of the experience. It's not all about, fast pace, which is really what's happening with the technology side of the fence here in these mountains. Now,
Yeah, we need the technology to get these messages out.
yeah, but it's also requiring the technology and the speed and the data and everything like that, because if we're to come back into the heart of Gaia, into the slower flow of nature and the connection of these sacred mountains, they have a lot to teach us. So a lot of people have gotten super influenced on just being influencers, getting numbers, checking in to see how many followers they have, versus just being here now.
Yeah.
Being here now. Sit in a spell. Being part of the vibration, being part of the experience, not just looking on your instant gratification clock constantly. Somebody told me it's really, most people in my generation and younger, they expect that crash course and weekend yoga or whatever, activation course or whatever, just like that. But if you sit with it, if you sit a spell with the wisdom beyond what anyone can teach you, because you will start observing, just like our indigenous people here on this land, how everything works in its natural rhythm, without constant distractions, without being, instant gratification. Which there's a part of that that's necessary for activation, but if you're meant to be on that path, you will find it within your heart, you'll find it within the nature, and it will integrate and channel into you, and then you can go, oh, that influencer has the same idea. And that happens a lot for us that channel here in the It's like, before we heard any of it, I got to watch Asheville become Asheville, when it was just Sleepy Town South Anywhere USA.
Which was even before Earth Fair, right?
Well, Earth Fair was, I do have to speak about the original Earth Fair. I want to say that again. The original Earth Fair.
Which actually, isn't that now right next to Trader Joe's, which was Whole Foods at one? It's
Yeah.
Whole Foods now. Yeah.
So actually, it was over in the Moog Music Building. It's called
Oh, and
Dinner.
I just brought that up last night, the Moog Music.
Oh,
yeah.
Bob had a big part of Asheville's awakening.
Yeah.
Story to be continued. We'll have to
Yeah.
do another broadcast on that. But, it's interesting because Earth Fair, when Sleepy Town South USA was, when we were just any southern, town, Earth Fair came on the horizon. And the OG founder of Earth Fair was the one that brought that community, because they had a place to meet all the farmers, all the visionaries, all, we were saying all the hippies that are now probably techies or whatever.
Right.
Earlier, we were saying that, the granolas, the people, the spiritual, community, that really did start that first seed of Asheville. I know it for a fact because my mom was pregnant with me shopping at Earth Fair. I was raised in that environment, and I remember it when I was a child, that people would come there and it was like they'd buy their groceries and they would meet and greet. And then eventually, we had other Earth Fairs in Asheville, but eventually Westgate was the hub. Westgate is so interesting. I asked my teacher, what should I do when I left the ashram? I'm like, what should I do to find my spiritual center? And he said, go get yourself a real job. And I was like, well, I'm a healer. I do quantum energy work. What do you mean real job? He's like, go work at a grocery store. You'll find your spiritual center. And I'm like thinking, I'm too accomplished for a grocery store, but I decided to work at Earth Fair. And I started putting all the puzzle pieces together, because I saw all the elders come in that people don't typically see, the ones that planted the intentions, the one that spoke the,
They had to shop somewhere.
they had to shop somewhere, and they all came together at that hub, and they really started bringing the healing in. Earth Fair, the original Earth Fair, I have to say that, incubated a lot of businesses and gave them a meeting place And those people were conscious with the food, and they became conscious with the spirituality and more spoken. And then we got to be a thriving, like, food sovereignty, community. And then we hit the map. When I did the first transformational festival in Asheville with the elders and youngers, 11-11-11's Energy, Earth Fair sponsored our event. They would never do that now. But Rosetta brought the cauldron, and Earth Fair sponsored our event, and we fed everybody. And it just felt so nourishing, because that's how we do it in the South. And I hope that never changes. I hope that never ever changes, because it is very important for people from the South to eat good.
To break bread. We have to break bread together.
We have to break cornbread. So, and I really feel, as a historian and someone who has had the electronic music awakening, that has also been raised by the grandparents I told you about, and mom and dad, TM Path, I'm kind of weaving this in a different wave, and I'm seeing from all sides of the fence. I can look at the elders and say, I get you. I can look at the youngers and say, I get you. So how can we remix and recreate our world for New Earth? Because people aren't vibing with the same things up in the South like we used to. And we have a lot of people moving here because of climate migration. But I'm this close to getting a billboard that says, if you love Asheville, keep it sacred. But I can't say, because karma happens. But something to that capacity, I will think about it. Because if you're leaving a place because of climate change, we are requesting that you do not bring what you are leaving here.
Exactly.
And Southern hospitality is alive and well, but we're vibing on a higher vibration. And so with that, I invite you to come here if your heart is calling you here to do the deeper dive, because more than likely it is in your ancestry. And because you've done all the spiritual work that you have the foundation to be able to go to the next layer, which may be so big. It may be the biggest thing, that it liberates other people to do the same.
Talk about the weekly Sunday gatherings and what this is.
So I do Sacred Synergy. I'm a minister. My husband and I are Universal Faith ordained ministers, and we have done ministry at other places, but the tree called me up here. I did not know that this place was a spiritual center.
And the water house. It's still raining. Yay.
It's still raining. We don't have to do a rain dance. We could just go out and have a rain shower.
Yeah.
And so it just felt like, when I saw their mission and vision and their core values, and I realized that I wanted to weave something a little bit different in ministry. I definitely was being called to ministry. I knew that was the path I was going. That this place was what really called me in. And so we do Sacred Synergy every Sunday from 4 o'clock to 8:30.
And it's always a different theme, right?
It is.
It's just depending.
Yeah, so sometimes we will have we'll start at the tree. We'll honor this beautiful, it's like a grandmother-grandfather tree. I don't know how to explain it. It's just like a universal tree that's connected to deeply, to root us and ground us, the mycelium. You feel the love. I call it Tree Temple. So we gather at Tree Temple, and then we do a ceremony. We'll do an opening in the heart. We'll do breath work. We'll do cacao sometimes. We'll do meditations, affirmations. We will do
And you'll do sound healing too, right?
Well, we will do drumming there.
Yeah.
We'll do drumming. We've learned how Asheville's growing with the traffic. We don't want to do sound healing up there. We do drumming up there. We have a labyrinth up there. We will really sit with this tree and honor the sacredness of this tree, because it's holding a lot of history, a lot of her story. And we'll just tree here now for a while, and then we'll have our potluck. And our potluck is a mix. We don't really have definitives about what this potluck should be, as long as it's conscious. And then we will go into the sanctuary, and we'll do sound healing. If we're not doing breath work up there, we'll do breath work. We'll have a speaker, we'll have a presenter, and we'll do audio visual. So we'll either have live audio visual, or we'll have an ecstatic dance for the community. And then we do a closing ceremony. Sometimes we'll do that with Agni, which is sacred fire, and we'll dismiss. And it's an opportunity to share with community, really your heart songs, what you're feeling, what you're processing during this time. And we invite people to join us. If you want to be a speaker or presenter, reach out to blueridgehealing@gmail.com. And yeah, we've got some beautiful things planned. I'll keep Missy in the loop. I have some very special guests coming. Very excited about that. And at 6 o'clock, we're going to take a break right now, I think.
You take a break, yeah.
And then we're at 6 o'clock, we're doing a global grandmother's meditation and prayer, synchronized around the world. And I invite you to join. I am a new paradigm grandmother known as Galactic Grandmother Frequency
Just share
Appalachian AG.
about the paradigm a little bit, because of the fact that I've done two paradigm tours on other shows, and I am going to do a YouTube live maybe tonight, but they can't pick up the sound, even though I was trying to do the headphones. They're not really hearing the sound over the phone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I do paradigm sessions online that you can hear with headphones, and I'll tell you exactly how those headphones work. I have been guided to do these sessions since 2017. I knew I was going to be the owner of one when I met the unit in its prototype at Bob Moog's wake, Moog Music, and that happened in 2005. I met the owner, and I was deeply in the world of electronic music, and I felt the energy of this instrument more than I can even explain. So I've owned mine since 2017 and grateful to use
It's
it.
like a living being, really.
I call it quantum sound healing because we use so many different variables. We set up our grids and everything a little bit different. But I also build vibroacoustic beds. I rebuild them. I didn't find anything that I was really feeling optimal with, and worked with living design consultants. Tika is one of my mentors, and so we rebuild these beds.
And we don't diagnose, treat, or prescribe. This is a theoretical practice for educational and entertainment purposes only, but I would call it to a cat's purr. And they say the hertz of what a cat's purr is, and this vibration, this shaking when you can lay on this, and it gives your body a massage with sound. It's only, I think it can heal bones, or helps your bones to restructure themselves and your connective tissue.
I broke 4 ribs. I used it. It works. Trust me. And so we use the sound, the light. We use all analog. Even in the electronic music circuit, I don't use DSP. I don't use digital with this. I wanted the whole room to be analog, and I wanted it to breathe. And so our instrument, oddly enough, has an interesting setting. 369. It's not built into any of the other instruments, so it is the new earth frequency. And sometimes it will kick in on its own accord, which I love. And we do teach a lot about how to get back into your vessel, your body, your temple. And we have people do sessions, and we work with other quantum tools to be able to activate and harmonize the energetic body, mind, body, and spirit, to align the chakras, to hemispherically biobalance. And we also do beat-oriented tracks. But people seem to really like the vibroacoustic and the sessions we're doing with the paradigm, and the analog frequency healing with all of that concerned, and we do Ayurveda as well. And we also teach breathwork. My husband's a master breathwork practitioner. He's been taught by 5
And
teachers.
I've done his class, and it is amazing.
Yeah, speak on that a little bit, because we
I
are
really
inviting
don't
people-
remember what it was called, but I remember this
Dragon.
thing about the dragon blue lotus, and it was just very empowering to help get rid of like blockages in your body. It was just, it helps, we are breath, we are the ruach, we are spirit. So having this spiritual breath work, you can feel where you're holding tension, and it removes the tension, as well as like bringing, I don't know, like light frequency codes. It's almost like sound, even though you're not trying to sound, but it's vibration. So it's a vibrational breath, if you will.
Yeah, he was a survivor of chronic fatigue, narcolepsy, sleep apnea, being bedridden, having TBI, and he was definitely a survivor that came online during his time on to show people that everything is frequency and vibration. So he has taught to groups of 2,000. He's been realized by some Vedic teachers, and he also has been seen for what he's to do for his generation. And so we have a center called Halcyon as well, Halcyon Healing Heart Space, and we allow people to come in for a day or several days. We can host. We have a B&B experience, so if you're interested, reach out to blueridgehealing@gmail.com. But what I wanted to close with, in gratitude, it is so interesting how many people get called to these sacred mountains. But if you get called here, realizing that it is a heart opening to the next level and a humbling that you might not have experienced. And it might be literally a call from your ancestors to do the next layer. And you'll start seeing these mountains a little bit different. And if you can turn off your cell phone and you get into your heart space and you can connect with earth here and you can just breathe in to what this place is and just see the beauty around you.
And it doesn't matter which side, if you were on the Confederate side or you were on the other side, you might get called here anyway, because the Reynolds Mansion was a place that actually hosted, you know, the women were the ones that had to take care of the soldiers fallen on either side. They weren't taking sides. They were there as nurses and they cooked for the people. So even though the guys were out fighting, they're taking care of them.
And, you know, we have still groups like Daughters of the Republic and things like, it's so interesting. If you look at even how those things are, like those groups, they have yoga now. They have, you know, like being able to heal and deal with like fight or flight, things like that. Even in some of these very, very thick Southern, you know, and more indoctrinated, very, very indoctrinated spiritual places, you know, that there is movement happening in the South in places like, I can't believe when I'm listening to Samaritan's Purse, like we have Samaritan's Purse here, Billy Graham Foundation, I do have to say this. They're playing techno in the background of the Samaritan's Purse videos. And I'm like, you know, there's some interesting things happening here besides just our spiritual community. And if you go to Asheville, you're going to see thousands, and there are thousands of healing communities, healing art spaces, like intentional communities, you know. So this is its own ethos. This is its own dimension, you know. So if you come here, come with an open heart, but also enjoy the down-home nature of what this place is as well, and our indigenous culture as well, because we're a new South.